Hi, hello, how are you? Craig Chapman here, and welcome to Brutally Roll Your Own Backend, a short video series on writing your own low-cost backend for a Delphi application. This is part 6. I had said at the end of part 5 that part 6 would be where we get started with the Delphi coding. However, I've had a little time to reflect on this, and I think we need to do a little more with our PHP code. So I'm going to show you the places that I think we need to update, and we'll get those done in this part and come back to the Delphi in part 7. So let's get started. So one of the things that I'd like to change here is the doRead method, and as it stands, the doRead method selects everything from the table that's connected to this endpoint and returns it all to the client. Now that's not ideal. Let's say that our notifier app is signing in and checking the devices table to see if it is registered. Well, it doesn't need to see all of the other devices that are registered. They belong to other people. There's no reason for that data to come back. So it'd be nice to be able to filter the doRead method. And before we do that, however, there's another security type concern, and that is having a permission system. So again, the notifier app wants to be able to read all of the regions at our regions endpoint, but it doesn't need to be able to create regions. That would be done by the administrative application. So it'd be nice if we had some way to prevent the notifier app from accidentally or deliberately misusing the endpoint. Obviously, we're not going to code it to do anything that it shouldn't, but if we can protect the endpoint with something like an API key, that would save methods from running that shouldn't be run. Now, in order to do that, we need to pass an API key up to the endpoint with every request. Now, the HTTP protocol specifications don't really specify whether or not get and post variables, or form data as it's called, can be sent with every method or only with certain methods. However, the REST debugger that we've been using to debug our endpoint will only allow the post and put variables, sorry, the get and post variables will only allow these to be sent with the get, post, and delete methods. It doesn't allow it on the put method. So I'm not sure whether that's a bug or a correct understanding of the HTTP specification, because the spec's not really very clear, but we need a way to send an API key up for the put method. So we're going to take a look at that, and all of that really comes down to a problem that's been standing for some time now, and that is in the CRUD class we have this post or get method which goes out and looks at the post variables and the get variables. It's only used in the delete instruction currently, but that fetches our variables, our parameters for us. Unfortunately, it shouldn't really be in the CRUD class anyway. The CRUD class shouldn't have any knowledge or understanding of post or get parameters. So we're going to fix this little domain creep, and then we're going to modify that out so that we can pass an API key for any method. So let's start by taking another look at the REST debugger, and we'll make sure that notifier.chapmanworld.com, and if we switch to the parameters tab, we can put the resource as regions. We'll make that GET request, and we'll see the data that we have in the database. So I have North Austin, South Austin, East Austin, and West Austin with their IDs. So our endpoint is working. Let's go ahead and make some changes. I'm going to take this get, or it's annoying, I'll save. I'll take this get, post or get method here, and we'll cut that out, and we're going to create a new file under private lib. We'll create a new file called requestdata.php. Okay, and then we'll open that file up and we'll make it a PHP file. We'll put our post or get method in there and close the file off. Now let's go over to CRUD table and find the delete method, which is right at the bottom here. And we can see that we're calling this post or get because we're expecting this method to be on the superclass. So let's go ahead and remove this and just call post or get directly. And in order to do that, we're going to need the file that we just created, which has our method request data to be included. So that shouldn't have made any changes to our endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and click send request to get our data, and then let's delete entry number 5, West Austin. So I'll switch to the delete method, and we need a parameter for this, which I'm going to add get or post int pkid and the value of 5. Now when I execute this request, we get a number 5 come back, meaning that it's all worked. So our include file is included correctly and the method is successfully moved. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is modify this method, and I'm actually going to replace it entirely. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a function, and what should I call this? I'll name it after the file. We'll call it request data, and it's going to take no parameters. It's going to return an array. So what we'll do is we'll say post or get, and we'll get the array merge. Let's do recursive. I don't think recursive is really necessary on get or post, but it can't do any harm either. So we'll merge those two arrays, and that's what we're going to return. So we'll return get or post. Okay, so now that we have that function, we're going to remove this old get or post function. And from this array, we need to adjust our CRUD table back down in the delete method. So instead of calling post or get, we're now going to call request data. And we're going to ask for the array entry, which is indexed by this key. So we're actually using the array as a dictionary, which is exactly what get and post are. Okay, so if all has gone correctly, let's come back into our debugger, run a get, so we can see that we have North Austin, South Austin, East Austin. Let's delete East Austin, which is ID 3, so we'll switch to the delete method, and our parameter will edit to remove number 3, apply, and send the request. We got null return, so something went wrong. Let's take a look at this. Request pkid 3, it's in the get and post, and it's the delete method. So let's take a quick look at what we're doing up here. We're requesting this key field. Did I have the key field name right? Int pkid, yes I did. Okay, so for whatever reason, the request data that came back from our function did not include what we expected. Get or post. Post or get or post. That was a little bit silly. Okay, so now let's go ahead and try that method again. And we deleted record 3. Good. So just to confirm that that all went according to plan, we've still got 1 and 2, but entry 3 has been removed. Great. Now we're going to make another change to this request data function. For our put method to work, we need to be able to pass up the data from the client in the message body. And we're already using the message body of the put method to pass our JSON data. So what we're going to have to do is encode the parameter that we want into the JSON data that we send up. So let's go and take a look, close this file. Let's go and take a look at our update method. And we can see the first thing we do here is decode some JSON data. Well, I'm going to take that and put it into our request data function. And let's just change the name of this to JSON. And we're going to do JSON decode. Now, the JSON decode function has an additional parameter. I'm going to set this to true. This parameter is, it tells the JSON decode function to return the data as an associative array or an associated array. So we're going to go ahead and do that and put an ampersand to suppress any error messages, because there are cases when, for example, we're calling delete, there isn't a message body. So we're not going to have any data come back from that, and there may be an error. I want to suppress that error. Now, because that data might be null, we're going to put a condition in to test for it. We're going to say if is null JSON. That's an if not is null JSON. Now, in the case that it's not null, we're going to create a new array data, which is this array merge function. We're going to merge our post or get array with our JSON array. So that will give us all of the parameters get, post, and from the message body encoded in JSON as a single array. On the other hand, if JSON is null, then we still need data, but we're going to just assign it to post or get, and then when we return data, we'll return simply data. Okay, so what that should do now is mean that we can put our parameters just about anywhere. Let's go back to CRUD table, and instead of requesting data, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to request the request data array, and I'm going to take an element named data from that array. Now, I'll explain what this is in just a moment, but I'm going to do the same thing. We actually use this in our create method also. So I'm going to do the same thing right here. Okay, so let's go and take a look at what that does. Let's suppose we want to create, we've got North and South, so let's create East Austin as a record. So what we would have done before is we would have changed to our post method, because that's our creation method. We'd have gone ahead and set a JSON body, and previously we would have simply had the JSON array with the record that we want to create. And I'm going to go ahead and remove these parameters just to make sure they don't interfere. But if I call this method as it is now, it's going to fail. So send request, internal server error, it failed. What we need to do instead is open an object, and we're going to pass in a parameter called data, and the value of that is the data that we had before. And then we can close that off. So now we're putting in a parameter named data, and in this, where did I put the code? In here, we're actually pulling out the parameter called data as the array that we're working with. So let's go ahead and run this call. And you can see that it's inserted South Austin. I didn't change it, so we're going to have two South Austins. But let's go ahead and run the get method and send request. And we can see we've got North Austin, South Austin, and South Austin. Now, actually, that's kind of serendipitous that I made that mistake. Let's see if we can alter that. So we'll go and use the put method. And what we're going to do is keep the data array, but we're going to put in the PKID. So this is the ID of the record that we want to change. And then we're going to change that to North, South, East. We'll go for East Western. East Western? East Austin. Okay. So let's go ahead and send that in. And we can see we're now in East Austin. And again, if I go to the get and send request, 1 to North, South, East, we've altered our PKIDs. Okay. Let's suppose that we wanted to put an API key in as a parameter. And I'm going to go ahead, I've got a couple of UIDs I generated earlier. Let's use this one. Okay, so I'm going to put that in as a parameter alongside the data. Now, it should simply ignore this parameter. It's not part of the data that we care about. So if I do a send, it has ignored the data as we expect. But if I come over into our do update, let's take a look at getting that API key. API key is equal to, and we'll do the request data again, but we'll request the API key. Then we're going to echo the API key, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the method. So now we should get this same record come out, but we should have the API key listed before it. So let's send the request. That did not seem to work. So it didn't get our API key. Echo API key. Maybe I need to do, let's try dying at the end of that. So let's send the request. And nothing came back. Okay. So for some reason, API key is not making it in to our request array. API key, API key, API key. We're requesting the API key. So request data. Postal get variable gets merged. Postal get. Returning data. Let's do a var dump on data here. And we'll also call die. Let's go ahead and see that. Okay, so the API key is there and it's a string. It can be seen. It's indexed as API key. So, I see what's happening here. So the first time we call the request data, it's reading the file contents as a stream. Any subsequent calls are not going to be the same thing. So what we need to do is only call request data once. I don't really want to force that into here. So what we'll do is we will have a request data array. I don't like that option either. No, let's go ahead and force that into our methods. So we will put in here request data equals the request data array, and then from here on in we call request data, and then we're going to output our API key and die. So let's go ahead and run that method. Internal server error. What did I type wrong? This function remains as it was. Okay, this is request data equals request data. Okay, send request, and there it is. There's our API key coming out. Okay, so I can take this bit of code. Let's take the die out of it, let it continue to do its updates just to make sure nothing else is broken, and we get our data back. Excellent. So we're all up and running with an API key now. So the next thing that we want to do is to build in our permissions system. And what I'm going to do in this case is actually what I was suggesting doing a moment ago and creating a global variable for request data. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we'll have a global variable here, which we'll call request data. And might as well just put it right after the request data function and call request data. Okay, so this now is our global call to this function. So within here where I'm using the request data method, I'm just going to remove that out and I'm going to put in a global request data. So I'm going to do that everywhere in each of these methods. So we'll have request data as a global variable, just like the connection is, and then we will call request data. The read method, I'm going to put the same into the read method because we will need it in a moment. The update method we just did, so that is correct. And then the delete method, again, I'm going to do this. So we now have our request data in a single central location in the request data file. And that's exactly where we need it. So let's go ahead and start building a permission system. Actually, just to be on the safe side, let's double check that the code still functions. I want to make sure I haven't typoed anything here. So we'll do a get request and set request. And yes, the endpoint's still functioning as it should. So let's go ahead and put our security system in. And I'm going to do that on the CRUD base class right here. I'm going to add some additional variables into this CRUD class. So I'm going to add, let's see, create level. Then I'm going to add read level. We're going to have update level. And we'll have delete level. Delete level. Okay. Now each of these is going to be a integer number. So create level, let's say we set the create level at 100. When we authenticate the user from their token, they need a level of 100 or higher to use the create method. So I'm going to go ahead and put a constructor into this class. And the constructor is named as the class itself. Whoops, don't need that in there. And I'm going to add each of these as a parameter that we pass into the constructor. Okay, so those are our parameters. And we just need this create level equals create level. This read level equals read level. This update level is update level. And this delete level is delete level. Okay, so assuming those parameters get passed in, which we'll go and fix in a moment, when we call get response, we want to pass in an authentication level parameter, and we're going to test the authentication level. So we'll say if authentication level is greater than or equal to our create level for the create method, then we'll go ahead and do read. This is not create level, it's read level. Okay. Else, we're going to do return error authentication failed. Okay. Now this is going to be almost identical for each of these methods. So around the post method, we're going to put the same. And then around the put method, we're going to put the same. And the delete method. And the only difference is going to be the level variable that we test against. So in the post method, post being create, we'll test the create level. In the put method, put being update, we'll test the update level. And finally in the delete method, authentication delete level. D-E-L-E-T-E. Why can I never type that right? Okay. So now that we have that check in place, we need to go and update another constructor because we have already derived this class. So I'm going to go ahead to our CRUD table class, and we already have a constructor. Where is it? There it is. So I'm going to put the same parameters into this constructor, but I'm going to keep the table and key field parameters that we have. And I'm going to call the parent constructor, which is CRUD. Can't type straight today. Okay, create level read level, update level, and delete level. Okay, so effectively what's going to happen when we create our CRUD table, we pass in these levels, and when we call the base class to get a response, it's going to take an authentication level parameter. It's going to look through that authentication level and compare it to the levels that we passed for this endpoint, and only if the levels match are we able to call that function. Now, in order to do that, we also need to change where we're creating this class. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our regions endpoint, and we need to pass in the various levels to the table here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to include our request data. And the reason I'm going to include that is because in a moment we're going to test the API key and pass a user level in. But what I'll also need is some config data. So under the private directory, we're going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm going to call this config.php. We'll go ahead and open config.php, php. Okay, and we're going to pass in here, so we want a user level, which will be the notifier application level. This is a regular user, and we'll say that that level is 100, and then we want an admin level, and we're going to say that the admin level is 200, so it's higher than the regular user level. We also need a couple of API keys, so we'll say the user key is equal to, and I've got some UIDs that I generated earlier, and we're going to do the same for admin key. Okay. So now we've got this config file, we need to include this into our endpoint here. So we're going to do a require once. Actually, because the path is different, I'm going to put this one in first, and it just contains some variables, so it's not going to cause any problems. Private, and this is config.php. So we now have the config values, and we are ready to wondering if we need this request data. I'll come back to that in a moment. So first thing we need to do is, as we're constructing the CRUD table, we need to say in CRUD order, so create. We'll create as an admin option, so we're going to put the admin level. Read, well, the notification app can read, so that's user level. Update is admin, and delete is admin level. Ooh. Admin level. So those are the levels required to cause this endpoint to function. And then what we need to do is we need to pass in our current authentication level to the get response function. So I guess I am going to keep request data. No, we're going to remove that from this file. I'm going to create a new file in lib. Yeah, let's create I need a new function to get the user level based on the key. And I don't know whether I want to put that in lib or not, but let's go ahead and put it there right now. So we'll just call this authentication.php, and when that file is created, we'll go ahead and put some code in. Now, authentication.php is going to be used at the endpoint level, just like all the other include files. So when we include, we need to require once, and this time we're going to require private config.php, so that tells this file all about our level constants. We're also going to require once the private lib request data.php, because we want to be able to make use of the request data. And then we're going to have a function which is called getUserLevel. Okay, so what we're going to do in this getUserLevel is we're going to say if we need a couple of globals here, so global admin key, global admin level, global user key, global user level. Okay, so we also need to get the API key from the user. So we'll say API key equals request data API key. Okay, and we're going to call if API key is equal to the admin key, then we'll return the admin level. Else, if the API key is equal to the user key, then we will return the user level. And else, we will return 0. So that's going to say we don't have the permission to do anything. Okay, so one important note to make here. I decided not to do this, but you could create an array of keys with levels as key value pairs, and then go search the array for the key, and when you find it, assign the appropriate level. I decided not to do that because I actually only need 2 levels in my application, and I didn't want to have to build an array up in the config file. There's really no reason to do it. So just an option for you if you'd like to take that option. So I'm going to go ahead and drop back now to our endpoint, and we're going to do require once. I hope in all this typing I haven't made any serious errors. And we're going to say private lib authentication PHP, and then we'll call get user level and pass that user level into each method. Now, okay, so each of our methods now has a requirement for an API key. Let's switch to post and just make sure. I doubt that the body would be sent, but just make sure there's no body in there. So we'll start with the get method on our endpoint. We have no parameters. I'm going to send the request, and we were allowed to do it, so something has gone wrong. API key regions. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at our CRUD class. We're saying authentication must be greater than equal to level delete level. So let's go ahead and echo the authentication level and die the script at that point. Go ahead and try that method again, and we're getting a level of 0, which means authentication level should be greater or equal to, otherwise return the error. We shouldn't have had any data come back from read. So let's go ahead and remove this debug message and try that again. And we're getting data come back, so why is that happening? Greater equal. I have the operator the wrong way around. I forget with PHP. It's internal server error, so no, that's not incorrect. Oh, I see why. Okay, so read level, create level, update level, and delete level are all 0 because they need to be global. No, they don't. They need to be assigned from this read level. Okay. So let's go ahead and put these values in, and we can test again. Authentication failed. Good. So in order to get data, the authentication has failed. We need the parameter. The parameter is going to be API key, and the key we're going to try first will be the user key. So let's make sure that users have the ability to access this request, and no, they don't. So something has gone wrong with our authentication level checking. So we are requesting the API key against the admin key and against the user key and getting a user level. That all looks okay. So again, let's go back to our CRUD class and let's echo the authentication. Echo authentication level and die, and we can test this again. So we're still getting 0 for our authentication level despite having put a key in. So the request data, again, always forget this, global request data, and send request, and there we go. So we're requesting at 100. So if we come back to our CRUD class and remove the die, and we're going to go ahead and request data, and this time we get the data as we should. Good. So I'm just going to remove this parameter and test it one more time. I should get authentication failed, and I'm also going to add the parameter back in, API key, and we're going to pass in the admin key, which of course should have access to the read method. Okay, now in the interest of being thorough, we need to run through each of the methods on both the user and the admin account. So I'm going to go ahead and run through those. I think I'll pause and fast forward for you so you don't have to watch me test each and every one of them. Okay, so I've gone ahead and tested each of the possible combinations, and everything's working as it should, although I did notice that the res debugger, when on the post method, will not accept the key as a parameter either, but only so long as we have JSON data going in. So again, in that case, I can just put the API key in the message body. So everything's working as it should. We have one more little gripe with the PHP to get resolved. So let's go ahead and carry on and get that done, because then in the next video we really can get onto the Delphi coding. So over in our CRUD table we have our read method, doRead. And the issue that I have with this, of course, is that we are performing a select on everything. So what I want to do is I'm going to build up a where clause in much the same way as I built the set statement when we did the update. So I'm going to do this this piece of code right here, this setstr, and we'll loop through and use that to build our conditions. So let's get started on doing that. Where's my read method gone? There it is. So the first thing that we need is to get the data from so the read method. This doesn't have a message body. Okay, so all of the parameters are going to come in through request data through the post and get variables. However, we don't have a message body. So what we're going to have to do is something a little bit unique with this. Okay, so I think I know what I'm going to do. If we take a look at the res debugger, in the parameters I've got my API key, and at the moment I've got that set as a regular user. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a parameter which is called filter, and this could be filter, let's say filter 0, and we'll say int pkid, so we want to test the int pkid field, and we want to make sure that that is equal to and then some value, so we'll put 6. and just put 2 because that's going to give us a result. So that right there would be field operator expected value, and this is comma separated. Okay, so what we'll do then is in the method we will get this filter field, and we will break out those 3 parts and use those in the where clause. So let's go ahead and from request data, I'm going to do a for each, and we're going to loop through the items in request data, and we're going to get them all as a key value pair. And I like to space this out normally, so let's do that. Okay, so we definitely don't want to interfere with the API key. So what we'll do is we'll say if key API key. In fact, we're going to say if not API key. And then we can work with the values that we're getting. Now I'm going to put in a control variable again, as we've done before. And we'll say that the control variable is first equals false. And so we'll say if not first, then we're going to add to a string called whereStra, and we'll add the not ready to add yet. Okay, let's leave that for a moment. We actually need to get the parameter value. So what we'll do is we'll say paramstra is equal to, and then we want request. We've got the name value here, so it's the value. And we need to explode this. Okay, so PHP has a function called explode, and you don't necessarily remember the parameters, so I'm just going to go ahead and look that up. So we're going to explode using a delimiter and a string. I'm not going to limit this. Maybe I should. Let's limit it to 3 pieces. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say parameter actually. Parameter is equal to explode, and we're going to separate on the comma. The string we're going to separate is value, and we want to limit this to 3 parts. So then I should be able to say if count of parameter is equal to 3, and so we know that we've got 3 parts, then we can proceed. Okay, so the first is going to be parameter, the 0 entry, so that would be our field name. Then we're going to add the condition, so parameter 1, and then we're going to add a yeah, we're going to have to run through this loop twice, but we're going to add the colon and parameter 0 again. And the reason we're doing that is, again, we're making param0 the name of a parameter, which we are going to bind later. Okay. Now, if this is not the first, then we're going to do things differently. So we're going to say first equals true, actually false. Got that all the wrong way around. Let's get that correct. True. If not key, if count parameter. If first, then we'll do this string. If it's not the first, then we'll do this string, which is going to be exactly the same, but we're going to have a comma at the beginning. Okay, so our where string should build up from the parameters we pass in. Let's put some commenting in here. Build where string, and we need to initialize whereStra equals nothing, so that's initialized. Okay, now we also need to put in some AND operators. Actually, it's where the comma is. That's incorrect. We should have and. Okay, so our SQL is going to be select star from. Let's go ahead and test this bit first. So let's make echo Westra, and then die at this point. So now when we call this, and I already have the REST debugger set up with this filter 0 int pkid equals 2. So when we call this, what should happen, and we get an error, so that's not what should happen. Let's see here. Not key equals this is closed, so braces. I can't wait to be back in Delphi. Let's have a look at that. Still not quite right. This is done. That might even be it. Let's give it a try. Nope. So if count, here we go, count equals 3. That'll likely be it. So let's go ahead and remove the rest of these. And test it. Okay, good. So what we've got here is int pkid equals colon int pkid. So we're going to bind to this parameter when we prepare the SQL. Okay, let's go ahead and put in another filter. So we'll call this filter 1, and this time we'll say string name is let's say greater than equals, no, let's do string name like, and we'll put in %Austin. So if I add that, this should add to and string name like. Okay, I'd like a space on the and I'd like spaces around the operator. So let's go ahead and add those in. So a space on the and then we'll have that for this side of the operator and this side of the operator and there and there. So let's go ahead and see how that turns out. Okay, and like. Excellent. So that should work just fine. Now what we need to do is build up our SQL. So our SQL is going to be SQL equals select star from this table where Westra semicolon. Okay, and then we can begin preparing our SQL statement, and we can then, we're going to execute it. We're going to have to do some binding first, and then we're going to do this fetch results. Now the reason I'm copying all of this is because I want the option, as you'll see in a moment, to run without a where condition. So first let's get on with binding these parameters. So build and prepare SQL, bind parameters, and execute SQL. So for the bind parameters, I'm going to use this very same loop again, and we're going to put that in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the we still need to explode. I'm going to take out the last clause. We should still get 3, and that's important that we still do. So we get 3 parameters, and what we're going to do is we're going to call bind, which I've completely forgotten the syntax for, so let's go find a copy. So this would be the bind statement right here. Could read. So we're going to call the bind value. And for the key, we're going to pass in dot parameter 0. That is the key. And then for the value, we're going to pass in parameter, and this would be parameter 2. So that's going to bind our value in execute, and there we go. Okay, so for the moment I'm just going to comment this old code out. We'll say edit, comment, no comment. I never did bother learning the keyboard shortcut for this one. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and call this method now. So we should get any records where the ID is 2 and the name is like something Austin. So let's send the request, and we actually get entry 2, South Austin. Now if I take the let's take the ID 2 out and send a request, and we'll actually get all of the Austin locations. So we've got a working filter system there. Now if I take all of the filters out, this is going to leave us with a problem. Send request, I get an internal error. And the reason, of course, is that there aren't any filter options in there, and so the where clause is incorrect. So what I'm going to do, the API key should always be present, and we're going to do a test to make sure that it is. But if request data has, you know what, maybe we should just make this parameter explode key value. Maybe we should make it so that the parameter name always has to equal filter. And if there are no filter parameters, then we will execute the old code. So let's go ahead and do that. So key value, we're going to say parameter. We're going to process these in the same order each time. So rather than not equal to API key, let's make it equal to filter in lowercase. Equals filter. See, what we should be able to do is we should be able to test for the existence of that parameter. So let's just check that we've not broken our system here. So we're going to put filter in, int pkid equals 2, and apply, and then when we run that we get the second back, so that's good. So now what we'll do is we'll test for the existence of filter, and again I'm just going to check the PHP documentation. Okay, check if a given key exists. Its array key exists, that's what we're after. So we'll say if array key exists, and we're searching in the request data array. Oh, it's key first, let's get that right. We're searching for filter in the request data array, then, and all of this code here will be within those braces. Else, and then we can remove the commenting on each of these lines, and that's what will happen if there is no filter. Didn't put params around it. Okay. Send request. Good. So our filter is working, and if we delete the filter and send the same request, we get all records back as though we'd not applied a filter. So we now have a much more functional endpoint that we can use. Let's go ahead, and before we end this session, let's go ahead and add a couple of new endpoints. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a copy of regions and basically recreate regions as locations. I'm going to take out all of these code files, and so under public I'm going to create a new directory, and we'll call that locations. My apologies if you're hearing an engine on the recording, it sounds like somebody's mowing the lawn. Okay, so I have a locations endpoint, and I'm going to create a new directory, and we'll call this one devices. And then inside each of those, I'm going to create a new file, and each one's going to be index.php. So that's devices, and create a new file, index.php, under locations. Now I'm going to open up the regions index file, and I'm going to take a copy of that, and then I'm going to open up the locations index file and paste. And this time we'll just change the table name to tbl locations. And we'll do this one more time for devices, and we'll just change the table name to tbl devices. Finally, we'll just go ahead and test each of those endpoints with our REST debugger. So right now we're still on the regions, send request, and we have our regions. If I change this to locations and send the request, of course we don't have any locations, but the endpoint is returning an empty data set. And if we go ahead and change the resource to devices and send the request, the same comes back. So when we get started on the Delphi code in the next part, we'll be able to add devices to this list, regions and locations. I think that's a good point to end this video. Thanks for watching. My name is Craig Chapman, and until next time.